Welcome everybody to the first analysis of the show. We're going to do Mark of the Ninja, and let's get into it. Mark of the Ninja is a 2D stealth action game. Theme. The theme is modern day ninja. No, wait. It's modern day and ninja. There's a little bit of a difference. Remember those 1980s ninja movies? Like that. And not like Splinter Cell. That's too modern. Alright, enough of that. Let's do the aesthetics. Sound. For those who haven't taken a physics class, or have a sound degree, sound is super complicated. Mark of the Ninja has an older Japanese music style, and since this is a game about ninjas, that's a pretty sweet match. Much of the music is ambient. There's long, low bass tones with touches of high-pitched notes. The low bass tones remind you of sneaking. The high-pitched notes add tension to it. I also want to note that when you're detected, the music changes to a high-pitched tempo, which tells the player that they're in danger. We're going to talk about Foley. For those of you who don't know what Foley is, back in the day when they first started making movies, there was no sound. And then they started introducing sound. And when you watched the movie, it didn't feel right. It felt unnatural. And the reason this is because there was silence when people expected noise. And that's a weird thing to say, but I'll show you an example later. Anyway, a man by the name of Jack Foley started making noises for movies. It's used to immerse the player or moviegoer so that they understand what's going on in the scene. Some examples of Foley are doors creaking, people taking footsteps, etc. While this works with any game, I'm going to show you an example with Arma 2. First, with no sound, then with sound. Now let's try Mark of the Ninja. Pretty good, right? But seriously though, all the Foley in Mark of the Ninja totally immerses the player. This is a job that usually doesn't get pats on the back, but it probably should in this case. It never causes the player to break immersion. I would have to say, good job guys. Good job. The menu sounds. Yes, I said the menu sounds. This is a full analysis, not some tiddlywinks review. Anyway, the menu sounds are really good. There's really not much more to say. They stay in theme. Voice acting. Seriously though, the voice quality is really good. There's no ambient noises, snaps, crackles, pops, if you know what I'm saying. Pops. Praise your sound lords once again, as they did an excellent job recording the voices. As for those voices, the main character is a silent protagonist, but that actually works in the game because ninjas are not known for telling stories or cracking one-liners. Corporate Kelly, the right-hand man of Kerjan, the tough merc enforcer, was given the Australian accent.
Look, we've got a problem.
Oddly enough, this fits into the 1980s stereotype of the tough Australian, like Crocodile Dundee or Mad Max. And it tells the players that they have a challenging opponent ahead. Dosan was given the voice of an older, wiser man, like Ben Kenobi.
Really aggressive. They say it can drive you mad.
Given that he is the oldest member of the clan and the keeper of the marks, this makes sense. So good job! As I was given the voice of a calm Asian man.
Use the breathing techniques I taught you.
Since he runs a ninja clan, this is a perfect choice, as he would have the confidence and discipline to run the clan. Karajan is an older man with a Eastern European accent.
It belonged to Otto von Bismarck.
The Eastern European accent is normally harsh-sounding to native English speakers. This plays in well to the player's expectation that he is the antagonist. Aura has the only female voice in the game. It's both soothing and confident.
Karajan must be close.
In addition to giving players useful information, her soothing voice makes it easier to bond with her, making the decision at the end of the game that much harder. Let's talk about that art. The general style of the game is cartoonish. There's a natural jump to compare it to Disney's Mulan and Samurai Jack. We could also compare it to Shank, a game made by the same company, but we're not here to compare them, are we? Let's talk about that cartoonish style. On a subconscious level, it tells the player to relax, as you're going to have to expect some fantastical elements in the story. Since people are exposed to cartoons at a young age, and cartoons tend to have fantastical elements, this actually complements the game very well. Back on a more general note, the game never fails to convey anything it's trying to display. The art style never conflicts with its established design. Let's look at those character designs. The enemies. All the enemies, except for the dog and the stalker, are much larger than the character. The larger size of the enemies creates the appearance of toughness and intimidation, which the player will have to deal with. In addition to this, a normal guard has a square-looking jaw, which adds to his appearance of toughness.
I must break you.
And it's very apparent that he's carrying a gun. It's all well conveyed. The flare guard is noted by his distinct look and shield. The player is explicitly shown the guard shooting a flare before he has to encounter him. The gas mask guard is encountered in the caves, and per his namesake, has a gas mask. Imagine that! The elite guard is much larger than the other guards. He's noted for being bald and having a shotgun. His size tells the player he'll be a more difficult opponent.
I must break you.
The guard dog is a dog. Yep.
Okay, who brought the dog?
The sniper looks like every noob camper you've ever seen with a stupid laser pointer. He's not going anywhere. And then there's the stalker, the female techno ninja, which looks like a female techno ninja. Rafe. But enough of them. Let's talk about the main character. The main character is an interesting take on a ninja, as he's not the stereotype black suited ninja. As you can see in the evolution here, they had to change the black outfit to a blue outfit. This fits in with the game design as you have to display the character in both light and dark. This makes it easier for the player to identify them. In addition to that, there's also red added in to both the tattoo and the costume. This also helps the player see the character. According to Chris Solinski, I hope I just said his name right, I have no idea. The triangle shape is both forceful and aggressive, and I'm hard-pressed to disagree. As you can see from the evolution of the character, the forward design is much more aggressive and fits the story better. The backward leaning is more defensive and therefore wasn't a very good choice. Corporal Killer is a tall, muscular, clean-shaven man. The tall, muscular part identifies a strong adversary, while the clean-shavenness means he's young. These all combine to tell the player it'd be difficult to fight Corporal Kelly one-on-one! Karajan, much like Corporal Kelly, is tall and muscular. But he's also older, as he has a beard, he's well dressed, and his hair has gone gray. This all feeds into the fact that he's the owner of a company and fits that stereotype. Dosan is noted for having gray hair. Since he's the oldest of the clan, this makes sense. The only other item of fact is that he's dressed differently from any other character. His clothes are beige, which represents how he feels in the story. He's neutral to the clan. Azai is a middle-aged man who is dressed in a yellow and black robe, and who has excellent posture. His excellent posture represents power, honesty, and confidence. This is well suited for a leader and sets him apart from a typical clan member. Aura's the most impressive design. She's a small, in-shape female who's probably in her 20s. She's got large Disney eyes, a small nose, a small mouth with very full lips. And if you think I'm pointing that out on purpose, I am, and we'll discuss that later. Let's talk about the environment. The environment's changed from a typical dojo to a city to a cave to a desert. The player will normally only worry about the foreground, as it's the only thing they can interact with. But the backgrounds are clean, aesthetically pleasing, and should be commended. Let's talk about the game design. Mechanics. It's actually mechanics, but whatever. Since this is a stealth game, the primary mechanic is, wait for it, hiding. This is primarily done through the light and dark system, which the player is exposed to very quickly, and is given explicit visual cues on how it works. The hiding mechanic is expanded to hiding behind pots, within doors, or within grates or vents. The character is highly mobile, which fits in the theme of being a ninja, and assists the game by adding speed in a genre which is normally slow. This mobility is added to the fact that the player quickly gets a grapple, then later can buy a floating mechanic, and is later given a teleport mechanic. The speed separates the game in the genre. By adding speed, it attracts more action-oriented players. This obviously is a strength to the game design.
Go ninja, go ninja, go! Go ninja, go ninja, go! Go ninja, go ninja, go! Go!
Let's move on to attacking. Attacking happens in 3 forms: the direct attack, the stealth attack, and the gadget attack. A direct attack is attack on an opponent from a not stealth position. Obviously, it's designed not to be optimal as it takes about 6 to 7 hits, and then requires the player to hit the attack button to execute the enemy. In contrast, the stealth attack only requires 1 fluid movement. A properly executed stealth attack also rewards the player with a higher score. These design choices encourage a player to use the stealth attacks over the directed attacks, although it doesn't remove the directed attacks in case the player gets in a situation where they must attack, or prefer outright attacking. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The stealth attack requires a QuickTime event. This is to simulate if the attack was done sloppily or efficiently. The result of the former is that the death is much louder and may alert other guards in the area as a punishment. The QuickTime event is a combination of the movement key and the attack button used at the same time. For variety, the game will take the movement of the player, either horizontal or vertical, and either continue the movement or reverse it for the movement aspect. This is both a strength and a weakness of the design. While the dynamic nature of the attack requires both speed and timing of the player at the cost of their stealth, which is notably exciting to the player and a strength of the design, the binary nature of the design will cause some players to grow weary of the mechanic. Admittedly, the inappropriate and overuse of the QuickTime mechanic in the industry has led to player burnout. Mark of the Ninja uses the QuickTime mechanic well, but it's the only questionable mechanic that's used, which we can say is a testament to its other design decisions. The gadget attack in-game is referred to as attack items.
Watch out.
Attack items range from temporarily disabling enemies, like the caltrops, to outright killing them, like the ravenous insects. These items will need to be found in the game or purchased through the honor system, which we'll get into later. The spike mine, an instant kill weapon. The Hisomu terror dart, which causes instant terror to a guard.
Run.
And the caltrops and ravenous insects, which were just explained. In addition to the 4 weapons, there are 2 upgrades. One that allows the spike mine to be thrown and make no noise, and one to ensure that terror dart leads to the victim's suicide. It should be noted that all the attack items have a limited number. The limited number infers that the player should not use these constantly, except when the player deems the situation to be too dangerous or more interesting to use one of these solutions. Moving away from attacking items, the game also provides a set of distraction items. These distraction items provide an alternative means to solve any situation. These come in the form of a noisemaker, smoke bomb, a distraction flare, and a cardboard box. Much like the attack items, they are found in-game or purchased through the honor system. All of these items can be upgraded. The noisemaker and distraction flare can have a user-controlled activation, the smoke bomb can disable guards, and the cardboard box, an obvious nod to the Metal Gear Solid franchise, will allow the player to perform stealth assassinations at its location. And the last set of purchasable items are the techniques. In an attempt to go through these quickly, there are 2 armor upgrades, one that increases the speed of lockpicking, one that allows gliding, one that decreases the sound the character makes when running, and the 9 other regard attacking enemies. The last item to note is the bamboo darts. The primary focus of the bamboo dart is to disable an item, like a light or a fuse box, or to get a guard's attention as the darts are non-lethal. Now, it's apparent that the designers did not pick shuriken, or ninja stars, a ninja staple, nor do the stars make an appearance anywhere in the game. But you might have noticed that the art actually depicts a throwing knife. An actual bamboo dart requires a blowgun to be used. This tricky move was done by the developers to give the player an infinite supply of a ranged weapon while not allowing them to solve every solution with a ranged attack. As a shuriken would naturally beg the question, why is this not lethal? A sly move by the designers that assists gameplay, enforces the design, and doesn't break immersion. We would have to say that would be a commendable design decision. It should be noted that all attacks, items, and techniques are really just methods to get through the game. A more action-oriented player
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
may choose to upgrade their armor and attack techniques first, while a more stealth-driven player
You cannot leave any sign.
is more likely to invest in distraction items and increasing mobility. All these methods are relatively well balanced and allows the player to pick the method they would prefer.
Yeah, the honor system!
To acquire all these lovely upgrades, there's an honor system. Each level provides up to 9 honor points, and each of the points is broken up into 3 subsystems. Each subsystem can provide up to 3 points, and once a point has been earned, it cannot be earned again. The first of these 3 subsystems is points. Sadly, this is the weakest of the 3 systems, as it is the easiest to game the system. In addition to that, it caters to both mixed and action styles, but sadly leaves stealth at a mathematical disadvantage. This is hardly game-breaking, but... and here's the rub. You may have to go back and play in a style that you don't want to do. Anywho, the second sub-challenge is referred to as seals. All seals are level specific and usually align with one of the player's playing styles. By completing 3 of the seals, you get a new pretty costume. The costume aligns with the seals and usually is balanced by removing an ability but providing another one. Take for example the Path of Nightmares. Ew. The trade-off here is that guards may be terrorized when assassinations occur, but the player can't use distraction items anymore. The seals are an interesting addition to the player as it would encourage them to do things they wouldn't normally do, while providing the benefit of a costume and honor points. There was one misstep though with the seals, and it gives the plot point away at the end of the game and should have been adjusted. The last of the 3 sub-challenges are the scrolls. They can be found throughout the level and should be considered playstyle neutral.
I have no strong feelings one way or the other.
Some of the scrolls are found in challenge rooms, which are merely just order of operations puzzles that may require some slight dexterity from the player. Upon acquiring a scroll, the user is given a voice-acted, usually haiku poem. This seems like a missed opportunity as it usually has nothing to do with the story. The checkpoint system is a true strength of the game. When the player dies, he's brought back to a checkpoint that is relatively close. This allows for quick iteration. This is a huge contrast to the genre as they usually have you repeat sections you have already done. This very forgiving mechanic reduces the frustration normally seen in the genre, as players can retry the area with very little punishment. Let's talk about the UI, or the user interface. I actually had to break the user interface into 3 parts: the external UI, the internal UI, and the in-world UI. So let's explain what those are. The external UI is something that's not in the game world but is being conveyed to the player, such as the player's status. Typical examples of the UI are the health bar, the player's score, or their number of lives. Let's move into the internal UI. The internal UI is contextual information that is in the game world but not actually a part of it. Some examples of internal UI are highlighted doors or boxes, or blood splatters, like in Call of Duty. In-world UI is the newest kid on the block, and it is considered the Holy Grail. The reason this is considered the best design is because it more represents how we see life. Some examples of this are a destroyed car or torn clothes representing health. The next best is the internal UI. It helps the player by understanding that there's contextual information, like they can interact with something. It's often considered immersion breaking, but they don't have to remove their eyes from the focus of the game. The external UI is the least effective of the 3. This is because the player has to remove their eyes from the focus of the game to check their status, and in some cases may cause the player's death. In Mark of the Ninja, the external UI is very minimal, but is redundant in some cases. Take for example the character status in the top left. The status will indicate if the player is in the dark, in the light, or has been detected. But the game already handles all these situations. In the dark, in the light, there's an in-world solution, and the detected status changes the music and is visually represented on the screen. Another redundancy is the point scoring system. When the player achieves something, like remaining undetected, they are shown above their player, along with the right side of the screen. This, unlike the character status, can actually be removed via the options. The health and total score are also represented in the top left of the screen, but since there's no way to show them in world, there's no way to remove them. On a positive note, the text can be displayed to the voice actors. This is a benefit for players that are hard of hearing. The last external item of note is the gadget selection. This is represented by a D-pad mapping and the item in a pink box. Upon hitting the D-pad, the player is shown the full selection of gadgets mapped in black and white. Of all the external UI, the gadget selection makes the least sense, as it has two mappings and is oddly colored. A better solution would have been to just use the black and white mapping and inverse the color of the selected item. The internal UI. This is actually where the game really shines. The internal UI gives a variety of information to the player in multiple ways. The player is shown in visual form exactly how far sound will travel. This gives the player a superhuman ability to know if they will alert a guard if they perform some action. The player is also given the ability to know exactly how far a guard can see via a vision code or a flashlight. When the player is sighted, or a guard is distracted, they are shown a yellow circle. This immediately tells the player that they either need to hide, fight, or gadget their way out of the situation. Any locked gates or vents, or characters that are tied up are shown by having a blue lock near them. Gates and vents are given a glint, telling the player there's another path. This is a huge benefit for the player as it allows them to plan another route. The last internal UI is the guard's status, which is shown above their heads. It is usually also accompanied with a white circle, effectively counting down the status until they return to normal. Let's get to that good stuff, the in-world UI. Sadly, this has already been covered in the light and dark systems, so moving on. The external UI is mostly a benefit to the player with some minor redundancies that can be turned off via the options. The internal UI is where the game actually really shines, although it would benefit the game to turn some of those features off. And while there is very little in-game UI, the part that is done fairly well. Oh, I know you're going to love this hardcore stuff, the menu and options screen. The options screen has some kind of weird reversed control. I don't know, it's not a big deal, but it's just weird. There's also an oddity with the purchasing and selection screen, as the first time you do it, it feels more natural to be picking things in the purchasing screen. I think this has to do with the fact that the icons are much clearer in this screen. These are both fairly minor points in the game, but they should be addressed. Let's talk about dem controls! I've been playing the game on the PC, but I am aware that it was designed for the Xbox 360. I chose to use an Xbox 360 controller instead of a keyboard because that was the intent of the original design. I did go back and attempt to play the game with a keyboard and mouse, but it felt unnatural after playing it with the controller. Given that, the controls felt very good on the controller, they just couldn't be remapped. But they could be remapped on the keyboard. The most notable item is that there's a binary run button. This complements the stealth action of the game, as running is more likely to get you detected. Let's talk about game feel. On my system, the game was pegged at 60 frames per second. The reason I bring this up is because games at 60 frames per second feel more responsive than games at 30 frames per second. This is due to the fact that the player gets twice as many frames per second to give input. I can go into a lot more detail on this, but we'll save that for another video. Now that we know we're getting 60 frames per second, the game feels really good. The high response time with the animation choices makes the player feel very dexterous. This is a huge compliment to both the gameplay and the theme, as the player can feel like he's in control of the ninja. But the system isn't perfect. There are a few flaws, I would count less than 5, where the character climbed a wall instead of entering a grate. In addition to that, there were 2 instances when the buttons did not coincide with the action that occurred on the screen. This is a very minor issue, as all software has some non-responsiveness. Level design! The level design is very solid. The game switches between a linear and multipath system. This will eventually bottleneck the players into situations they must confront. This is a strength to the game, and will challenge more extreme playing styles, i.e., pure stealth or pure action. In addition to this, the level design deals with both vertical and horizontal aspects. This only adds variety and is a strength of the design. Do you guys like stories? Before we go gallivanting off into the story, I want to tell you why I had to break down the narrative into 3 parts. First, there's the narrative. That's the story given by the game. Then there's the second narrative, the story the player makes in the game. And then there's the player's experience. And the reason I want to split these into 3 is because the narrative is something that the player can't control. The second narrative is what the player can control, and the experience is the emotional response that the player has at the end of those 2. I don't want to lump the experience in with the second narrative, but we'll get into that later. But before we get tarred down in technical jargon, I'm going to explain the narrative in order, or ab ovo, which just means from the beginning. And not the way the game presents the story, as we have both the effects of an unreliable narrator, and the game begins in media res, which is just a fancy way to say in the middle of it. And now, story time.
Before the Restoration, as the other clans strayed and disbanded, a merchant sold us a secret. He led us to a flower whose petals burned with toxin. Put the toxins in your skin, and you will gain great and strange powers. But those powers will drag you into madness. That is why every champion vows to end his own life before he destroys himself. And the clan swore to protect.
Azai finds out that the plant has become extinct.
I've been dead a year. Maybe more.
Azai quickly picks a ninja to take the mark, and then orders him to rob Hassan Services. This is where the player comes into the game. Unaware of the previous attack and story, he's quickly befriended by Aura.
You picked the wrong guys to rob, Sensei. It's time for the old man to retire, boys. For centuries we have stayed hidden. We shunned the modern world and its jackals. But today, our enemies have found us. We must strike back. We will fight for our survival and our honor. I foresaw this day would come. And so, I called upon a champion to fight for us. He has accepted the first mark. He will defend the clan at a terrible cost.
Azai then orders the champion to assassinate Karajan.
We've tracked the Count to a stronghold in Eastern Europe. He may be cornered, but be careful. He's sitting on a stockpile of weapons with his best troops surrounding him. What is this junk from Hessian doing here? I'd understand if Azai brought back some treasure, but what is this armor? Why did he bring back guns? We weren't just sent to kill Karajan. We were sent to steal from him. Did Azai make you accept the mark for this? Have you thought about not killing yourself? Yes, I know. You'd bring shame on yourself and your clan. But is that worse than a wrongful grave?
My suspicions were right. Azai has lied to us. I have gone to the greenhouse near Tabriz to set things straight. Go with honor. But watch yourself, Tessa.
Please, you must spare yourself. At least until we know what's really going on.
You have saved us all. You defeated our enemies. And now, we have their weapons. And their technology.
Zai didn't save us from Hessian. He'll warp everything we stand for.
The time has come. Stop him! He must not get away.
So you go save Dasan instead.
Flowers have been dead a year. Maybe more. As I knew about it. He must have. You must stop Azai. And that means I must give you the last mark.
Welcome home. Your sword. I am not your enemy.
You risked our lives and our clan, all to hide your failure.
Who are you listening to? Have the hallucinations grown so strong? The voice you hear is temptation. It is trying to trick you, to turn you against us, to lead you into madness. You must not let it.
I've never lied to you.
You swore an oath to save the clan. Sacrifice yourself. Reclaim your honor. And you will give us a chance to survive.
The clan gave up its honor, its guts, and its pride. It's not worth saving.
I will leave you to make your decision. Take our ancestral blade from its shrine, and come when you are ready.
And you're left with the choice. Kill Zai or kill Aura. If you played the game, this may sound a little weird because it's not the way the story is presented. And the reason it sounds weird is because they started the story in the middle with an unreliable narrator. If you don't know, an unreliable narrator is a narrator whose credibility has been seriously compromised. Or, in layman's terms, the guy telling the story really isn't trustworthy. There are very few games that do unreliable narrators, and the only two I can think of are Spec Ops: The Line and Silent Hill, both of which are praised for their stories. In this case, our unreliable narrator is the protagonist. He begins the first game with a mark and immediately starts hallucinating and sees Aura. And since we're talking about Aura...
What's in a name? That which we call a rose. By any other name would smell as sweet.
Welp, that's completely wrong this time. Aura's name actually has a double meaning. In this case, it's a phonetic play on the word. Aura. And the definition for aura is the distinctive atmosphere or quality that seems to surround and be generated by a person, thing, or place. While normally this refers to a glowy atmosphere around a person, if we take a little artistic license with the definition, we can turn it into the quality that seems to surround and be generated by a person. And in this case, it's our lovely protagonist. And if you're real slick, you notice that there are a lot of crows throughout the game. This is also a representation of Aura. It is even stated later by Azai, it's temptation that you are listening to. So, Juliet, this is why people don't seek the wisdom of 13-year-old girls. Also stay away from Romeo. But I digress. What we have here is a complex tale of a ninja clan master, Azai, left with a difficult decision, knowing that he, nor any future clan master, will not be able to defend the clan through traditional means. Upon weighing his decisions, he quickly finds a ninja to take the mark and become the champion of the clan. He then quickly orders the champion to raid a local PMC. The champion then defends the clan. He then continues to kill 2 innocent men. Hey, I didn't say they were good, I said they were innocent. The champion then continues and unknowingly helps the clan steal technology. I want to specifically note that when invading Karajan's home, Aura says,
refers to you as the champion. But do you know what they used to call the ones who got the mark? The severed.
Well, I want to specifically point this out because we know Aura's not real. And if it's not real, it should be considered a direct manipulation of both the character and, by default, the player. Upon completing his last act, killing Karajan, the champion refuses to commit suicide. I want to point out that in this scene, Azai actually shows the technology that has been stolen. This is important because Azai is not lying to the protagonist. He's just not telling him exactly what is going on. Realize the clan's master isn't obligated to explain every decision to the clan. Azai is expected to do the best he can for the clan, and the clan is expected to trust his decisions. But since the champion refused to maintain his vow, Azai is left with no other option but to hunt him down, as he's a danger to himself and others. This is actually an interesting character arc. The character remains flat, but has just become dynamic. Once the champion returns, Azai points out that he's hallucinating, and then he tells him to do the right thing by going to get the ancestral sword and meet him in the garden. This move was specifically done to allow the character to have enough time to clear his head and make the right decision. While walking to the sword, the clan bows its head, and Aura states,
"The clan bows its head in shame, as it should."
In reality, though, the clan is bowing their head to the champion that just saved them, and are giving him full respect before he completes his final task. Aura then adds,
"After we kill Azai, we must cleanse the rest of the clan. None of them have any honor."
The player is then given the choice to either kill Aura or Azai. Alright, remember back in the art and voice sections when you thought I was being creepy? Yeah, the parts where I said she had a real nice voice and looked pretty hot. Well, that was all explicitly done just for this moment. They spent the whole game building a rapport with her so that you wouldn't listen to Azai no matter what he said at the beginning of the level for this particular moment. And based on your choice, the actual ending is exposed. If you killed Aura, you actually maintain your vow. Killing Azai actually shows the character becoming a demon, like they showed earlier. The story is actually really compelling if you know all the aspects of it. Just to give you some perspective, I'm going to go over all the narrative concepts. This deals with changes from one era to another, the hardship of leaders and what they have to go through, the dependence on technology and what occurs when it fails, the dynamic between a group and an individual, how important perspective is when handling decisions, and dealing with being wrong. Before I go any further, I just want to contrast this with the reviews that were given at the time of the release. Game Trailers gave it a 7.5 out of 10, and it, quote, ends in a whimper. ElderGeek.com described the story as forgettable. The Escapists referred to the story as a tale of revenge and skullduggery. And IGN said the story was, quote, not compelling. For the most part, the game tells the story at an expert level, but fails in the last couple steps of the journey. In Mission 12, there's a seal that tells you to kill 3 hallucinations. If the player had noticed this, this was a huge clue that you were hallucinating right at the end of the game. While this was mentioned before, it's something the player wouldn't have conscientiously been aware of. In the last level of the game, Azai points out that you're hallucinating. Immediately after saying this, Aura begins to fade. Leaving the fading out of this situation would have left some doubt in the player's mind. In this last scene, Aura's defense is pitiful. In combination with fading and being attacked, Aura's defense is, I never lied to you, in a sad tone. Azai then continues the attack, and Aura's response is, The clan gave up its honor, its guts, and its pride. Any person who would be directly attacked like this would be more aggressive or defensive. Some better rebuttals for this would have been, who are you listening to? He knows who I am. It's temptation. How dare you? Both of those answers are vague and wouldn't require a direct response from Azai. This would result in the player still having doubt in their mind. Regrettably, these 3 items gave up the ending before you actually get there, and it makes all the comments made by Aura on the way to the garden irrelevant. Okay, let's talk about the second narrative, and if you don't know what that is, it's because it's a term I just made up. As mentioned before, this refers to the actions that occur while playing the game. Now, why did I split these up? Well, the game's narrative can't be changed. Doesn't matter how many paths it has. But when you ask somebody about a game, they usually respond with, "It was awesome! I did X, Y, and Z!" The first part of it is an emotional response, and the second part of it are the actions that occurred. But I want to point out that the same is true outside of gaming. If your friend goes on a bad vacation, normally they respond with an emotional response. Then they go into the details of what actually happened. So in order to do better analysis, I thought it would be wise to separate the two. So I'm going to say that the emotional response is the player's experience. And then I'll explain the player's events as the second narrative. While we could lump all of this both into gameplay, we would be doing a disservice to both the technical aspects of the game and the stories that the players create themselves. To prove my point further, I often hear players refer to games with no story as having no narrative. And every time I hear this, I feel like it's a general failure to understand the medium. A game, regardless of what it is, will always have a narrative. Let's take, for example, Monopoly. Monopoly is a terrible game, as the goal of the game is players race to get rich, so other players are so poor they can't play anymore. And you thought Monopoly was about fun. You may disagree with me about this, but almost every second narrative I've ever heard of this game results in the same outcome, and in some cases table flipping. While there's no direct story in Monopoly, the second narrative of Monopoly is almost always the same. Which is why most adults I know will not play Monopoly. So, if you've been paying attention, you may have noticed I created a problem. And that problem is I created a new term and now I have to figure out how to analyze it. See, there's about a billion variables that occur in someone's second narrative. But I found a trick. All we have to do is look at the term that people refer to as replayability. Replayability is the general understanding that once you've played through a game, you haven't actually explored it all. And hence, the more variables are in the game, the more replayable it is. Technically, it's more complicated than that, but for our analysis, this is all we'll need for a working definition. Some examples that feed into this are multiple endings, secrets that you find in the game, and new weapons. And as these variables increase, so does the replayability. And in turn, the ability for the player to create new second narratives. This is why there's so many first-person multiplayer shooters, as it's a cost-effective way to create a lot of second narratives. So how does Mark of the Ninja actually stack up? Well, there are 2 separate endings, 3 major play styles, the levels have multiple paths and hidden scrolls, there are a variety of items to purchase, use, and master, and a series of costumes to unlock. And all of these combine to allow the player to create new second narratives. If we're going to determine how well it does this, I would use Dwarf Fortress and Gary's Mod as the height of second narratives, and a game like I Want to Be the Guy as the lowest, as you're expected to memorize the gameplay. I would rate Mark of the Ninja fairly high on the rate of possible second narratives, as most games are fairly linear and don't offer distinct second narrative possibilities. Player experience. I've already mentioned the fact that the overall experience is the emotional effect that the player has from the game. And I can already hear if emotions are subjective, how can you analyze them? Well, I'm not gonna, because that would be a logical hell. What I am going to do is explore the aspects that create emotion, and therefore, shape the player's experience. After some careful thought, I noticed that people say the same 3 things when they like a game. And the things they say are, the story is amazing, the graphics are amazing, the game is amazing. And I have to pry for the last one because the game is amazing usually means that a mechanic is amazing. And now I'm going to have to derail for a second, as we have to talk about some pseudoscience. In neuro-linguistic programming, it often states that people fall into 3 styles of learning: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, or tactile. I'm going to borrow these definitions and actually say these are the methods these people enjoy the most. Now, going a little bit further with this, I would say the people who are auditory learners enjoy the story the most. The graphics are for visual learners, and the mechanics are for the tactile learners. And at this point, you're probably wondering, where am I going with all this? Well, we're going to La La Land. Not really. I believe these all feed into types of immersions a player has for a game. Those naturally leading into narrative immersion for our auditory friends, aesthetic immersion for our visual friends, and gameplay immersion for our tactile friends. The more one covers that type of immersion, the better it is for that player base. Most games require a higher gameplay immersion because mechanical issues will break any immersion. An example where the narrative immersion is greater than the gameplay immersion would be Telltale's The Walking Dead. A recent example of the aesthetic immersion being greater than the gameplay would have to be The Order, 1886. The medium requires that the layers of immersion be done in the reverse order that they were created in to achieve the best results. If you're still paying attention, you deserve a cookie. But you might have noticed that I just tried to ninja. Get it? Ninja? That's a pun. Anyway, ninja in reversing the mediums without trying to explain it. But it's actually pretty easy. Books and stories were made first, that's the narrative level. Movies were made second, that's the aesthetic level. And video games were made last, and they added the gameplay aspect to it. I mean, when you think about it, when you're playing a video game, you're basically controlling a movie at a very simple level. Now each medium requires that the medium below it is acceptable to reach the next level for judgment. So, if the gameplay is okay, the graphics are fine, and the story is there, the game is often considered playable. If the gameplay is horrible, or even broken, more often than not, no one even wants to comment on the graphics, let alone the narrative. But here's where it gets a little complicated. Remember when we said that people learn things differently? Well, this is where a lot of disagreements regarding games occur and how, quote-unquote, good they are. While the levels of immersion are stacked upon each other, it doesn't take the same amount of judgment from a person to get from one level to the next. Assuming, of course, it doesn't break that level of immersion. Let's take, for example, any Japanese role-playing game. A majority of these games use a turn-based system, have an anime art style, and have elaborate stories. A player may play through this game accepting the play style and the aesthetic merely to experience the story, while another player won't even play the game because it uses turn-based mechanics or has an anime art style. Given that, I'm going to stay away from the subjective side of the immersion and use the pyramid to see how the game stacks up. By determining the quality of each type of immersion, we can determine if an average player would have a good experience. In Mark of the Ninja, one of the highest strengths of the game is in the responsiveness of the controls. As stated in the mechanics section, the game runs at 60 frames per second, has responsive controls, and very few technical issues. It would be rare, but not impossible for the player to have a break in gameplay immersion. While I stated earlier the cartoonish design complements the story and fantastical elements that occur, another user might find the style off-putting. If that is the case, the user will either not play the game, play it for only tactile reasons, or ignore the style just for the story. Assuming the player has accepted the aesthetic style, there would be no reason for complaint as there is no aesthetic conflicts. A narrative player would be exposed to an interesting story presented in a confusing manner. Mind you, I had to go back and figure out what occurred in the narrative during this analysis, as unreliable narrators pose a lot of questions. The more compelling story actually lies with Azai, while the more interesting action lies with the protagonist. This is the only misstep that occurs in breaking the immersion of the narrative. There could have been an easy solution for this for players that were unwilling to unwrap the narrative. After the player had chose to kill Aura, it should have cut to a cutscene of Azai, finding the flowers dead, pinging a champion, ordering the attack on the PMC for technology. All of this would have cleared this up for the players that were there only for the tactile reasons or visual presentation. This explanation of using the levels of immersion would explain why the reviews came out of the story being not compelling or forgettable. Given the high level of gameplay, solid aesthetic, and slightly confusing narrative, it would be expected that an average user overall would have a positive experience. In conclusion, Mark of the Ninja excels in multiple areas. The game has tight controls, good replayability, and few technical issues. It also provides a constant presentation that matches the theme. The story, while interesting, took some slight misturns. The innovation of speed and quick iteration to the stealth genre along with all the previous things mentioned, makes it possible for the average gamer to enjoy the game.
And that's all, folks.